Yes.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Stephanie Flores-Koulish. Looking forward to our conversation. Thank you for the patience with the technology. Looking forward to this conversation. Uh,
Yes, me too. Thank you so much, Simon. It's good to be here.
it's good to be. It's good to see you. Smiling face on a Monday.
Thank you.
So to what extent does this healing word? To what extent does that resonate with you, Stephanie?
Sure, yeah. So, I reflected on this a few weeks back. And then, I'm gonna start out by kind of, you know, um talking through what I had originally kind of reflected upon, but then we'll see like where we go from here because, and part of this idea of healing is that every day is a different day, right? And so I feel that, while my reflections of a few weeks past might be relevant generally, universally for me, I also think that, there are moments that I think healing means something different. So I'll start by that kind of,
Yeah, yeah,
kind of pretext there. But a few weeks back, I thought, for me, healing comes with time, and discernment and reframing and self-acceptance. So I thought about time and the ways that, time helps to put a perspective on what transpired, at least for me, my childhood, because for me, when I look back, it was more of a sad time, and confusing time. And so, I can think back about, my when I was a little girl and want to reach out and kind of hug her. And that's kind of this moment of healing when I can get to that place of thinking about that, and again, it's not a constant, but discernment is part of the important component for healing as well. And it's a reflection process that I'm a faculty member in a Jesuit institution, and we like to use the term discernment a lot because it's part of the Jesuit way, if you will. But I do think there's a lot of value in that for us as adopted people to kind of consider the magnitude of the impact of adoption in general. And then in addition, discernment for me personally has happened through the studying that I've done within adoption literature, in listening and engaging with materials from other adoptee professionals in the field. Um, and as well, it's a consideration of my own circumstances, that what's made me unique and how I can reframe my own circumstances to make sense of them in a new light. And so the reframing then, it takes place through the course of time. So going back to that time idea, for me, it kind of like is a way to consider how I've realized that uh this concept of intersectionality, of thinking about multiple intersecting identities, and especially for a consideration of those who are in marginalized identities and the ways in which we can provide a unique perspective on viewing the world. And um, we can kind of think about it in a way that can flip maybe a general understanding of it being less than or under, without the power that we may have. On the other hand, it can be flipped, like I said, to see ourselves from a unique position, from a position of strength, to be able to see how we can really sort of coalesce with other people with marginalized identities, to see the potential there. So, some people in scholarship have maybe almost seen it as like a superpower type perspective, that could be potentially um, uh, discounted or disregarded, but actually that can be unique and important and can be empowering. And so this empowering idea is what can lead to self-acceptance. And that ultimately is where healing can lie. For me, existentially, I started out rootless like many of us. And, as a teen and young adult, that rootlessness for me led to a lot of years of self-deprecation, wild exploration, and a lack of self-care. But, as I've aged and matured, I've tried to build a solid foundation for myself. I've come to generally appreciate my uniqueness that has brought me to a particular way of viewing the world, which for me is really kind of through humanistic lenses to kind of um, uh, correspond with other people who might have similar viewpoints. And fortunately, I feel like I've encountered, various mentors through my life where they've seen that in me and have kind of underscored it, uplifted it, and helped me appreciate that in myself. So that's really kind of how I try to think about it, or at least that was when I spent the
Yeah.
time to really kind of think about your question. I thought about the time, discernment, reframing, and self-acceptance process.
Yeah. So there's clearly a lot of thought, as you say, in that. The bit that really struck me as the emotionally soothing part, right, was the stuff that you talked about, um, parenting the little girl who was sad, right, hugging the little girl that was sad, and I thought of, we often mention this parts work, uh, IFS therapy modality. We often end up mentioning that on the calls, on the interviews, and you're nodding there. And for me, that the book's title is by Dick Schwartz, is No Bad Parts, and it's the kind of the we're giving ourselves, we're self-parenting, we're being the parent for the little parts of us that feel lost and alone, and we are reparenting them in a sense as adults, and we're giving ourselves the parent that perhaps we didn't think that we had when we were growing up, and that uh, and so it's never too late to have a new childhood. We are soothing, rather than being angry about our angry parts, or worried about our worry parts, or insecure about our insecure parts. We are hugging them in. We're bringing them close rather than trying to push them away. And that was the strongest kind of emotional stuff that came for me when you shared that, because obviously you shared so much for me to dive into, and I'm wondering to what extent is that the emotional side? To what extent does that represent the emotional side as well as this, to healing, the calming, the nurturing, the accepting side of it, rather than this more cognitive kind of thinky stuff?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a great question. My therapist asks me that all the time. Because I'm good at hiding behind that, especially as someone who is has a PhD and does this for a living, does thinking for a living, that is. Um, I've done, and just, I think also probably combining that with growing up in an environment, grew up in a working class community, where it was important. My father who adopted me was a 20-year military man, had been before it, they adopted me. But so there was a lot of toughness that um, I had to adopt, if you will, right?
yeah,
And and then kind of entering into this career that I've been in the last 25 years has really only sort of amplified that idea that I can kind of just think through things. So the feeling part, that's a great question, because while I wrote that, I don't know that I'm as cognizant or see, there you go again. It's always part of my thinking. But I tell you, I think about like the last couple days, it's really just been a little bit different from, even a couple weeks ago when we were going to initially discuss this because tomorrow's my birthday. So, that's always a trigger day. And so I'm feeling the feels. And in addition, and this is probably a bigger feeling the feels, is next week we take my youngest, my third child and last child to college, to university, about 5 hours away. And, that's a transition point. And, I think about, with regard to like the feelings piece, how much I've poured so much into being a good mother to my kids over the last 22 years or whatever, and 21 years. And it's been a lot. And then to have that pivot happen, it could be that now is where I have to do more of it for me. And so some of this is still like in process in terms of the feeling and the healing, because I don't know what lies ahead. I don't exactly know with regard to where I'll be without having that opportunity to put my feelings towards my children, to offer them what I never had, which was to be there as best as I can emotionally, because that's a big piece that I lacked, was that I didn't have parents who had any emotional intelligence whatsoever. And so I've tried to kind of prioritize that, as well as just being there to hear and listen to them. Another thing that I know that my parents didn't have for me, they just didn't have the space or time or, again, emotional intelligence to be able to provide me what I needed to listen to who I was. So I've done that as best as I could over the last 21 years, and it's about to change. And that's so it's an interesting time that we're speaking right now.
Yeah. I I was chatting to a guy who came on the podcast years ago, like probably 3 years ago this morning, and I was saying that I've heard this phrase lifelong learning about 35 years ago, but I think I've only really understood it in the last couple of months. And although I would say that I've been doing it, I've been doing it for at least 17 years. And it's openness, right? It's open to learning new stuff. And we are in the same way as we're conditioned, we're brought up, off many of us, to stuff our feelings, right?
Hmm.
And to go for this, to stick into this thinking area, to stick in the thinking area, especially in the military. I'm sure that you can't, that there's no space for feeling. Like I could go on and on about that. Um, we're brought up to be afraid of the unknown, right? So if somebody says, "Oh, don't you know?" No, I don't know. Well, what are you going to do? Like, well, and we're brought up to respect certainty, to respect knowing, to want to know, to like. It's it seems to be a cultural thing,
Hmm.
um, and and if we've had, as adoptees, we've had all these questions that we don't know the answer to, and that feels scary. Um, and does that add to our fear of the? Does that add to our fear of the unknown? And maybe when we bring that fear up into the light of awareness, then maybe that fear eases a bit somehow.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, in some ways, I feel like I haven't been afraid as much, through the years. I really kind of been a bit of a risk taker in a lot of ways, but in other ways, I see what you mean, in terms of just sort of complacency and allowing for like like life to sort of happen to us as opposed to us kind of taking the reins.
Yeah. And healing is feeling less afraid, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's again, I think it's a little odd to be talking to you today because I don't feel as like kind of
Yeah.
courageous and like enthusiastic as maybe at another time, right? So I think again, I think that's an important acknowledgement is that there are times and days where we just have to give in a sense.
Yeah. I saw a great graphic on Facebook the other day, and it said, uh, feelings fluctuate. And it did it in graphics, it said like a little pie chart thing or a graph. So it's feelings fluctuate and then worth doesn't, right? So you could see
Yeah.
these feelings going up and down, uh, and uh, and then the worth being a constant along the bottom. And I know again, I think another thing that we adopted or not, right? Our culture in the West is one of emotophobia, right? So we have what did was it Roosevelt that said we're the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Mhm.
Like how many like 70 years ago, whatever that he said it. So we've been become scared of our we've become scared of our feelings and what's wrong, like so and people are all over us if there's something wrong. If well, I'm not feeling so good. All right, well, let's get to work and let's change that, rather than a more accepting,
Mhm.
a more accepting take on our own feelings. Because if we're okay with not feeling okay, we're always okay. Yeah, it's become, but with it's this emotophobic, um, and then you've got the parenting layer on as well there, right? So uh, we're concerned about our kids,
Mhm.
we're concerned about our own feelings, we're concerned about our kids' feelings, and before we know it, we're into uh, an overthinking phase. We're into a like a vortex. How am I gonna get out of these feelings where we've had those feelings of sadness and we've felt that we're going to drown in them, um, and we become we've become scared. That's why we stuff them. That's why we deny them. Whatever. Um, and I've had the same thing from a therapist 8 years ago as you. And she gave me I did a few sessions with her, and then we kind of got it. It seemed like we'd got to the end of where she could help, and she gave me her notes, and it said something like, Simon evades
Yeah.
tough feelings by moving to a safer cognitive space or something like that. She'd written it down to herself.
It's always good to see the background notes, right?
Yeah, and but she she typed them up for me, and some of them made
Oh,
sense, but none of it went to my worth.
right.
None of it went to my worth. None of it went to my value. None of it went to my self. None of it went to my essence. It was all about my my emotions. And it's the I think when we talk about healing, often we're looking at our psychology and uh, our feelings, and we've got a narrow view on healing. It's broader than that. You know, you mentioned working at a Jesuit college. Um, there's there's something deeper than our feelings and our thoughts. And we're, you know, I'm thinking about a metaphor here. You know, the surface, the surface of of the ocean can be raging in a force 10 gale, or it can be calm. But right at the depths of the ocean, it's always calm down there.
Hmm.
And we're bothered about the waves on the top rather than
Right.
taking a deep dive, right? Taking a deep dive to something that to what's more essential for us.
Right. I mean, and that to me is kind of part of that time piece that I talked about, that, we can always kind of ground ourselves in this self-acceptance. Like, okay, so sometimes I'm not acknowledging my feelings like I should, or another's feelings. Um, I can continue to work on that. Um, and it doesn't, like you said, change our self-worth, our self-value. And I think, um, as far as like some of the fears go, I also think just exploring new ideas and things, and it still helps us to kind of understand who we could have been, you know? And I think that's an important thing too, is just to sort of go out and try some new activity or a um new thing in your life, new things to see like what could have been, what might have been. And then it just sort of it adds the fun part, which is also a feeling that's important, right? To kind of enjoy. And so I think kind of trying to find those spaces for places for joy is in that calm part that we were talking about, that is really like should be a base that we strive for.
Yeah. The self acceptance for me is that you know, when I think about when I think about Dick Schwartz's book, No Bad Parts, No Bad Parts, and self acceptance seem to be saying the same thing, right? So if you what's the opposite of no bad parts would be some bad parts, and we would therefore be trying to so those we're not accepting those parts, and this word but this word self is word, you know, we use it self acceptance or self esteem or um, self appreciation, self knowledge, self awareness. We use it in a gazillion ways, don't we? The self worth, self word. What does self mean to you?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because our development of self was disrupted, and so I think self is what we make of it, in a way that no one else, non-adopted people, have that opportunity. I mean, I guess it's again kind of maybe the flip side of, the parental phrase, the adopted parental phrase of, other people got stuck with their kids. and we got to choose you. And on the one hand, I can see that phrase just, annoys the hell out of many of us, me included, because that's what I heard. And on the other hand, that idea of being stuck that we have freedom from is kind of a cool idea because, many of us are with the non-adopteds in our lives, right? We work with them, we love them, we and befriend them, and they all have such plagues oftentimes from, what their self was established to become as a result of their families. I mean, some where we encounter have that lucky experience, but a lot of times it's kind of a burden. It's a burden oftentimes to sort of live up to or meet with. And for us, there's more of a freedom, I feel, of self that we could establish. And so again, I think that's why that reframing piece is really important, because it's about reframing it in a way that is healing. To say, gosh, I could be anything because there was nothing there was no mold that I knew about. There was no expectations. It was more open, so to kind of come from, the people who didn't graduate high school and to now have a PhD that I got on my own through a long journey that was rough and complicated. It's like that's a good feeling of self for me. And I know it follows a lot of stereotypes of the bootstrap kind of mentality of, doggone it, I pulled myself up. But, it's me establishing myself, and so that's like
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Yeah. So if I were, if you were talking to an American woman now, she would say something like "You go, girl" or something like that, I believe. Um, but
Right.
I'm a stiff upper Brit, so I can't say things like that. That would be far too far too American. Um, what are there any particular healing moments come to mind for you, Stephanie?
Sure. Yeah. Fleeting moments of just the other day, I had my firstborn was here visiting from college, and I was participating in a virtual poetry workshop that I do once a month with military women veterans, because I went into the Air Force after high school. So there's a group that I found a year or so ago that is a virtual monthly poetry group. And my kid that was visiting is doing a lot of poetry in college and university. And so I said, hey, come listen in. And it was such a cool thing afterward for for us to like swap readings of what we had written. And so that was a moment of joy, especially because I found myself being drawn to writing about them. And um and so I read it to them, and then they were reading me poetry that they had written both at that moment, and then a couple of things they wrote during their class. They're non-binary, so that's why I'm using they. But that was a real cool moment of joy. Um, cool moment of joy. I think it's moments of joy, right? It's just moments that you want to cherish. A moment was finishing up a book over the weekend that was written by the football soccer coach that my son is about to have in university. He's going to play a Division 3 soccer in a small school in New York State. And the book is about the way that this coach has a way of viewing the world and he transfers onto the pitch, but it's this eyes up and about being attuned to perception and planning and persistence and these ideas. And again, maybe it sounds very non-Brit like, but it was something that just to me gave me joy to think I'm handing my precious child over to him, and he also talked about how his ideas resonate with this university. And so I feel like that's a joyous moment. While it's sad that I'm losing my son to, he's not going to live at home anymore for who knows, if ever, but that he's going to be in this environment that'll be uplifting, that'll be encouraging these wonderful, important components of self that he needs to find out about on his own beyond us.
Yeah.
That brought me joy. And I wrote to the coach, I wrote him an email and just said how excited I am, sad, but excited that he's going to have that opportunity to be in this environment. It was joy for me and healing when I was spent 3 weeks in Colombia this year with in June with so last month with my first family that I only met a decade ago. And so that was total joy and healing, and just loving every minute of it. So this is just 3 recent ones.
Yeah. Have you listened to any of you haven't listened you listened to the podcast we did with a neuroanatomist whose name Jill Bolte Taylor. Have we talked about her?
I don't think so. No, no, I
Okay.
didn't that one.
So Jill Bolte Taylor, she had a stroke. She had a left brain stroke. And the left brain is the language center. And so that was completely shut down. And the right brain is where all the is the bit that we touch with the creativity, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we're open to new things, when we're open to a new poem, when we're open to a new idea, it's all kind of right. It's all right brain stuff, because the right brain has no language,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it can, but it's the creative center. It's the stuff where something comes from
Mm-hmm.
nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, um, just an aside on the football soccer thing. Have you watched the Ted Lasso series
Yes, of course.
see, that's an American guy work in a Brit a London soccer club, and that idea should not work. His whole philosophy should not work in an English environment, and yet it does. And the program works because of that, right? Have you done any? Have you written any poetry around um, adoption?
I have, yeah, yeah. It's less like polished because I've never published anything, but I definitely have like free associated, I'll put it that way, free associated some writing through these guided opportunities that I've been participating in at least this year. And yeah, I think actually, to be honest with you, I do have one of my scholarly pieces. Sorry, I'm not going to remember the name of it, has at the beginning of it a little bit of some of what I've written. Um, and so, yeah, and I thought about that before, when we were preparing for this, and I was like, "Ooh, could I do something? Could I read something?" So I could, if you want to hear
Yeah,
some rough
that'd be
stuff.
great. Yeah,
Yeah, because I tell you, I love the way that the person who does this. I'll give you a little background. She's a poet, the person who runs these groups that I participate in, and she started her work at our major military hospital, Walter Reed in Washington, D.C., working with returning veterans with PTSD, and has been able to expand the work, and then through COVID turned it online. But it's just such a wonderful process she has with working with people to draw out their deepest sentiments. But yeah, so I did mark a couple pages. So here's something, again, not polished, audience. um and it's based on another poem, because this is which you break off from other people, called Permission Granted by, I can't remember, Sullivan somebody, but I didn't write there the full name. And this is in handwriting, by the way. You do not have to be um a perfect daughter to two mothers. One mother who started at 6 weeks simply was not well equipped for life's many twists and turns. Vacation to the beach, to Europe, to New England, anywhere. She tried to prepare me to fear the neighbors, the sand, airplanes, and subways. Instead, my restless, searching self found the other mother who fulfilled her job from conception to day two. 48 years later, the 24 roses and invitation to be in her last will and testament proved too much, too fast, too late. I failed twice as a daughter because the synchronicity never existed within either mother. So that's
Yeah.
one. And then yeah, I don't
Yeah, can you unpack a bit of that for us?
well, yeah, I mean, it can be painful if our mother, whoever they might be, couldn't really be a mother to us. And I got unlucky twice. So, um, that's kind of what it's about is that, my mother who adopted me just really couldn't be a mother. She's just emotionally stunted. And then when I met my birth mother, who never ended up having any other children, it was just like she just came rushing like a tidal wave at me and then never really listened. And so literally she wanted to put me in her will within the first month of meeting her. And she didn't really have anything, but it was just the idea of whoa, 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 lady. I already have another mother it's difficult to take care of, you know? And so then you're left with this, God, I'm a really shitty daughter, aren't I? Like, I don't really like either one of them. And so that's kind of a hard feeling to sort of exist with. And yet it's not me. It's not me. And I'm aware of that. So although I can say I failed twice as a daughter, because the synchronicity never existed. I didn't have that with either of them, but it's not my fault. So it's okay to kind of say these things that are kind of shitty, but it is what it is in a sense. It's sad, and yet it's not my fault.
Yeah.
So
So,
that was what I was
yeah,
trying to do there. Permission granted.
permission granted. Yeah, that's great. So you said earlier on that time heals. Time is one of the things. What did you say? You said time, discernment,
Hmm.
reframing, and acceptance. And and it strikes me that the over time things change.
Hmm.
So we have realizations. So you realized that it wasn't your fault. So rather it's
Well,
about
actually, first time when I had to realize that they were shitty. And I think that's something that is hard for us to acknowledge sometimes. That if something, I don't know that that's the case for a lot of other adopted people, but you know, it was like a first sort of experience with some therapy in my early mid 20s when someone said, "You were emotionally abused." And I was like, like it just hit me with a ton of bricks, like, oh my God. And I've been trying so hard all of my 20 something years to like get them to love me like I thought I needed to be and deserved to be. And that's why it wasn't my fault. I didn't have to put on that dog and pony show so much. Fuck that. It's just not going to be meant to be.
yeah. But it goes you talked about you mentioned this word existential earlier on, and I heard this phrase that stuck with me a couple of months ago, and this was not in an adoptee. This phrase did not come out of an adoptee's mouth, and yet it speaks volumes to me and to us, right? And the phrase was existential wrongness.
Mm,
Existential wrongness. And we're we're not born believing that, are we? We're not born with any beliefs. I'm saying this quite a lot at the moment because I think it's so strong, so strong. And so Gabor Mate, and I'm not a big fan of his. I keep on saying this, but maybe I will be a fan of his. I'm a fan of his for this. Let's just say, let's reframe this. Talk about that. I'm a fan of him for this one gem, one gem I've had from him. Right, a couple of months ago, he said, "Feeling not enough is not a feeling; it's a belief. It's a belief that we're not enough." So we're feeling that we're not enough, but that is actually coming from a belief that's invisible. It's been there so long that we're not enough, and it's a belief in existential wrongness. So what's healing is moments when that belief gets totally blown out, totally blown out of the water, right? Um, So we've been going great. We've been going 30, 40 minutes and it hasn't blipped. And now it's saying my internet connection is unstable. Um, did you hear what I was talking about? The belief and the
I
feeling?
did, yeah. The sound was fine. You just froze
Yeah.
visually, but
Yeah.
yes, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, it's we don't we don't feel we're enough, but that as isn't actually a feeling, it's a belief. And
Hmm.
so for it sounds to me what happened, and I don't know, let's me ask that rather than put it on you. Is that what happened in the therapy session where the therapist said you've been emotionally abused, and you realize it's not me, it's not me, it's them.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was like such a profound beginning. And, so many things kind of clicked for me in that time of my life. It was in my mid-20s, and I had, again, kind of been somewhat self-destructive up to that point in time. And not a healthy relationship, and just kind of just I felt like I was always running, trying to
Yeah.
perform and make people happy and all of that. And then that kind of enlightenment that happened through that um acknowledgement was just so soothing. It was so just sort of like, I don't have to do this. And it was like a time to start to believe in it was the beginning of the time to start to believe in myself and what I could bring to the world, and why, for who knows why I ended up kind of still walking the earth, but for whatever reason I did. And so let's make the best of it.
You said acceptance earlier on. Did you say self-acceptance? I didn't scribble it.
I did.
Yeah. So this is an interesting thing, and there's a difference. But like, so you say self-acceptance, and we use the word like self-acceptance, and we also use this word self um, self-destructive. Did you say just then?
Yeah, I think I said something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So these seem to me to be different selves.
Right. And I can see that. I can see that I had a different self up until that time in my mid-20s. That was a different self. And it's still, a little it is still a little painful when I think to like the self that I was trying to become when I was an adolescent, and I was you know engaging in some of that self-destructive behavior, but I was also starting to build a sense of self through friendships that I had. And yet I haven't really maintained those friendships too much, because I feel that once I hit that time in my mid-20s and I started to realize that I didn't have to be the entertainer in order to be loved or what have you. That was part of who I was at that time in my adolescence. And so I started to sort of see the ways in which I was departing from who those people were in relation to me. And that's still a little painful to think about because, okay, so the general idea is that a lot of people that I went to high school with, a lot of these, good girlfriends I had, a group of good, tight girlfriends at a all girls Catholic high school. They're very conservative here at this point in time, and I'm not. And so it's a strange kind of feeling of knowing, I started to even get the birthday wishes from them by mistake today, through a text. We're all in a group text. And yet I can't really I don't feel as comfortable being around them because I am a different person than I was then. So that's an example of like seeing myself as different selves, um, and still kind of reconciling and struggling with some of that, you
Yeah.
know.
Do the
Oh, I have another poem that I can read.
yeah, great.
It kind of relates to, I'm looking at the first line. I mean, it kind of relates to that. So let me read this one and then we can
Yeah.
finish up talking. Um, and this might have been related to a offshoot of another poem called The Layers, by Stanley Kunitz, I think. But anyway, I have walked through many lives because when I came out of your womb, you handed me to strangers, and I'm not who I was supposed to be. Yet it is now I who pity you because of all that you missed while you drank tequila, danced salsa, and doubted your choice. While I played Debussy and Scott Joplin at Landover Mall, and crowds applauded little brown me as I tore up those ivories. Until I realized you weren't there to give me my map. And I felt so empty and sad, so I placed a sack on a stick, held tight, and hitchhiked from Lackland Air Force Base to West Berlin. Heck, we may have even rubbed shoulders at the Texas bar with the bucking bronco. And you just missed me in that Today Show crowd scene in West Berlin when the wall fell, which brought me back to the books and odd jobs at Blockbuster Video and the San Jose Children's Discovery Museum. And I still doubted myself until poetry started to unlock the layers left in that delivery room.
Wow. Wow.
Many selves, you know, and back to kind of what you said about the creative piece. It's true. Synchronicity too. When I saw that therapist, and I don't remember exactly what year it was, exactly how old I was, but it was when I was living in California and I was finishing up my undergraduate degree at a slightly older age because I had gone into the Air Force after. I was majoring in something called creative arts, which was, at the time, it was something that was going to head me towards becoming an elementary school teacher. That was my first aspiration. And but because they weren't doing like that kind of a program there. So I did creative arts and I ended up taking all of these awesome classes that had me writing poetry and thinking about things from a really like existential point of view and reading theory and reading postmodernism. And there was a class assignment in a small class I took. It was a performance art class, and we had a small handful of us. There were 3 adopted people in this class.
Wow.
It was very random. And so we put together a presentation, where all 3 of us talked about our circumstances as adopted people in one presentation, with one person who had encountered her first mother. She had a tape. Back in those days, it was an audio tape that was the phone call, the first phone call. Another person had a conversation about how she was treated in her family, and then I had these photos. But the idea that happened, all of that happened, it was a self-expression period of time for me in my mid-20s through creativity that just unlocked such a flood of emotions through expression. And then I was reminded that I was expressing myself a lot when I was playing the piano as a kid too, and that was just nonverbal expression.
Yeah.
So that's healing.
Yeah. Um, I don't know if you know, I'm a bit of a metaphor nerd. Um, did you come up with any metaphors for trauma or healing in your creative spaces?
Not any particular ones, but I think, again, when I was a growing person in high school, this idea of being a chameleon and kind of blending into other spaces was often used, and I both like it, and it also works because there was, at that time, there were less like Latinx people in the media, and so when people would see me, I was very ambiguous, and so there was something about that that I also really liked and appreciated. So I still kind of like that idea on the one hand. On the other hand, it it's a bit of an escape from trying to understand a solid color, a solid self. So I'm not sure. I mean, obviously the butterfly works really well, right? Birds flying, this idea of freedom and being free to be who we want to, So I don't know. I have a tattoo of a salamander, and I have one of a bird here.
Yeah.
Uh,
Wow.
so it's, you know, that idea. Maybe those are good metaphors of
Yeah.
animals.
I haven't shared this one for a while, so I love you know you built in your class you've done in your poetry class you've done some building your own poetry off other people's like
Yes.
I don't know if that sounded like I was being a bit I don't think you didn't use the word building but uh, you didn't take
Inspired by, yeah.
yeah you didn't the main thing is you didn't take offense, right? So what I think is I like I like building on metaphors. So the idea is well, the first question is, so we come out of the fog. What do we see next?
Oh, I think initially we're going to see some redness, we're going to see some anger. We're going to see some being just,
Yeah.
you
And
know,
metaphorically, what would that be if you were staying with a weather, meteorological metaphor? Coming out.
oh, oh, with weather. Yeah. I mean, sure. Like, a hurricane, you know, um, a storm,
Yeah.
and
And what's healing then?
knowing that the storm will pass. I mean, it's just, and that's the piece about time, and it makes me feel so old to kind of say that sometimes, because I was telling one of my kids the other day, oh well, experiences do help, because of course they think they know everything in their early 20s, but it's true though. Sometimes, you have to kind of see these cycles of some dark days and dark times and angry times to know that the sun will rise again. It'll, we will have moments of lightness and brightness.
Yeah. I saw this. I saw the saying. Um, so that out of you gave a few different ones, but I saw one of the things are similar. So we come out of the fog, which means that we can see clearly, right? When our vision is not impaired by the fog
Mm.
anymore. What do we see? Well, we see the start. We see the dark storm clouds. Gesundheit. We see the dark shadows of storm clouds, right? And so, what do we see next after that?
Sometimes the rainbow.
Sometimes the rainbow.
When
Yeah,
I was a kid, the Muppets,
yeah, the
yeah. So
cartoon.
they were pretty big, and it
Yeah,
was a kid in the
growing up.
States.
Yeah,
And
sure. Then.
Kermit sang that song, and I played it on the piano, the Rainbow Connection, you know. And I always loved that song. There was something about it that just so resonated within me. There were a few of these little moments of hope that somehow I discovered as a child, and I have no idea where that came from, but it was these like little, very clear memories for me of these glimmers of hope.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say halfway up the stairs.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
the Kermit singing halfway up the stairs is the stair where I sit. It's not in the middle. It's not at the top. And um, but yeah, the rainbows. And we've heard a lot about rainbows, right, from the adoption agency. The rainbows and the unicorns and rainbows. Yeah, uh, that's what they got. So uh, what I what I saw next in terms of me continuing the metaphor was that the storm clouds go, the storm passes, to use
Mm.
your word, the storm passes, and then uh, then we see, or yeah, then somebody points out to us that we are the sky,
Oh, ooh, that's cool.
which is a Buddhist thing, right? And for me, that means that we're putting a gap between the trauma that we feel, and it is a feeling thing, right? Rage, anger, insecurity, sadness. We're putting a gap between the clouds and the sky. And we are free of our trauma-bound identity because we're not
Yeah.
self-identifying as the trauma.
Hmm. Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about that. And yet we can have moments where we just can't help
Yes.
it. It comes back. It grabs us, you
And
know,
yeah. And we're
birthday.
less scared. Once
Yeah,
we've seen the storm pass once, we're less scared when we see it again.
that's true. That's true. That's right.
And then we're back to the emotophobia thing, right? Emotophobia is basically being upset about the weather. And like in the UK, that is a thing.
Oh.
That is, uh, yeah, how are you? The weather's terrible. Yeah, but what about you? Well, no, the weather's terrible. Yeah, I've got, like they've got that. There's the thing, isn't there? They call it a thing, the diagnosis, SAD, seasonal affective disorder.
Yes, that's right.
That
That's right.
happens, and it's weather induced, and we're brought up believing this stuff. We're indoctrinated into this world where the
Oh.
weather determines our mood.
And here it's funny because we're oftentimes just saying everything's great, everything's fine. So that's our way of
Oh
kind
yeah,
of escaping the realities that are
yeah,
in existence, especially with climate change.
yeah. We're
No, it's
deniers.
not
We're trauma
normal.
deniers. We're trauma
Exactly.
deniers. We're climate change deniers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
brilliant.
Hmm.
Fantastic, Stephanie. Is there anything else that you'd like to share there?
No, I think, I just want to make sure that for the your audience that um people are where they are at their moments in their lives. And, I certainly don't see myself as someone that would, expect anyone to have similar kind of sentiments as my own. We all are different. We all have our own experiences, our own adoptive families that have um been unique and uniquely shaping of us. And I think that's really important to acknowledge,
Yeah,
and some people don't want to connect with their first families, but I'm glad as hell I was able to connect with
yeah,
some of mine. And uh, my birth mother, first mother, was complicated. But the relatives that she has are fabulous. So for me, that's been great. But it's not always that case for other people, So I think it's important to just say that,
yeah.
that it's okay where you are. And
You are.
I wish everyone to seek health and peace within themselves, however that manifests.
Beautiful. Thanks, Stephanie, and happy birthday for tomorrow.
Thanks a lot, Simon. I appreciate it. Yeah,
Thanks
so
for
glad
listening.
we got to chat.
Thanks. Bye, listeners. Speak to you soon. Take care.